Hello, I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost, I'd like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. The topic of this video is going to be on a political discussion as an American. And so, what I want to talk about in this video is what I think about politics and my general stance towards the American political scene. The only reason why I'm interested in talking about this is just because recently a few neighbors of mine have been trying to have just basic casual conversations with me, and political issues have come up due to the whole coronavirus deal. Black Lives Matter movement, the riots or protests, whichever you prefer to call them. And so these things have come up, and people are oftentimes surprised to find out that I really do not identify with any group. And people try to put me in a category. I really don't know if I fit in any category per se. And if anybody who's watching this is a more politically savvy than I am, because part of the reason why I don't really pay attention that much to politics is because I would say I'm not informed enough to really make substantive opinions on many things that extend outside of some economic and social issues, because I actually have studied economics, basic economics, not quoting Tom Sowell's book, but just basic economics. And I've studied neuroscience, anthropology, cognitive science, psychology, um, genetic uh, popula- population genetics, human variation. I'm just looking at some of my books. Human variation, and a number of other topics that make me comfortable in trying to understand social cultural phenomena from a broad standpoint. So that's usually, and I've read a lot of philosophy, and so I actually know where some political ideas come from, and the political philosophers, or just the general philosophers who became politically interested. At a certain time, for example, Thomas Mann and certain issues and things like that. And so I've read their works, and I know what they think and their arguments, Marx as well, and what's going on, and so on and so forth. But all of those things were just general philosophical endeavors for me, exercises trying to understand the genealogy of ideas and things like that. So, not a politically interested person in the slightest. I'm a person who's interested in ideas. Primarily, I'm a mathematics major, pure math major now, fully, and thinking about picking up a minor in philosophy, but not really. Actually, double majoring or picking up a minor in philosophy as well is probably most likely going to be double majoring, because I was once a double major in physics and applied mathematics, but now I'm a pure math major and probably going to be doing the philosophy. So my road to graduate school may be a little slower than it was before. So with that said, that's just basically my background in this whole deal. But a lot of times I get questions that center around what do I think about Black America and what's going on with Black Lives Matter and things like that, because, well, I'm Black. And so people want to know my opinion because I have opinions on a number of other topics and issues that people seem to care about, like creativity and depression and all other sorts of things. But I don't really bother with those other things because I think social issues are pretty complicated and they're very complex. They're really difficult to get right, also, and so I am a bit less interested in getting active within the domain, within these domains, whether that's participating in anything or providing ideas, because I think, look, you have no, I think, look, I have no idea what I'm dealing with necessarily. Um, and so the thing I do say, though, is the only thing I can really talk about is my personal experience, and tie my personal experience to what I've studied and understand about human nature and human psychology. Also, I've listened to some arguments of critical theorists, and I haven't read very many critical theorists and things like that. I have gotten more Lacan and Derrida and Foucault. Working through more of the postmodernists and Deleuze, the French, the French postmodernists. Um, I am not finished reading the French postmodernists. Um, they're like with any philosopher I've read, there are things I can say so far, because right now I'm studying Foucault. There are things he says that I agree with. There are things that he says I do not agree with. And from a purely, I guess, like, so even putting myself in a camp as an analytic philosopher or continental philosopher is very difficult, because I think each philosophical school has issues. I don't see anybody, it's very hard for me to see anybody as correct or right. I think certain people get certain things right. I think certain people get certain arguments and perspectives more accurate than not. I think that many people have interesting ideas. However, when philosophy extends beyond a conversation about ideas and their validity from a certain self consistent standpoint, but their actual makeup and consequence to human behavior and the world, that's a whole different kind of ball game for me. So I would say that I'm more of a connoisseur when it comes to philosophy, rather than somebody who's interested in. So connoisseur in the sense, like, I'd analogize myself to a person who likes wine and owns a wine vineyard. So I want to make my own wine, but I want to make my own wine just because I enjoy wine, and I've been to several vineyards and I like tasting the wine and things like that. It's just a joy I get from this process. So I make some and I do some and I think about it, just because that's what I do. But philosophy from the standpoint of a pragmatic activity, I'm not a philosophical engineer. And what I mean is, so for example, Hegel has a certain political philosophy that's a part of his philosophical corpus. He was not writing that philosophy, even though now we read it from a certain theoretical vantage point. That was not a theoretical exercise for Hegel. Hegel was literally trying to come up with a total system of political, uh, intellectual, scientific summation. It's a very different way of going about and doing things, such that it was not something that was meant to stay on the shelf. It was supposed to influence the movement of the social order and the of Europe in general. That it's not innocuous. Similar with Nietzsche, he had a grand project or a mission. Nietzsche was a lot more specialized than Hegel, but Nietzsche wanted to see the end of all systemization in philosophy. Nietzsche, whenever I read Nietzsche, I think Nietzsche was the last classic philosopher. Um, a lot of times people consider Nietzsche a modern philosopher. A lot of ways, and so I think Nietzsche is a lot like Einstein from the standpoint of analogizing it to physics, where you have classical mechanics and modern physics. Whenever you're learning modern physics, you learn special relativity and general relativity, and so um, well, modern physics, it depends on the course, but you learn everything from bits of special relativity to early quantum mechanics and the basics of quantum theory, just the very rudimentary basics dealing with Schrodinger equation and energy potential wells and things like that. But for the most part, people put Einstein's theories within modern physics. I don't consider Einstein's theories modern physics, just because they differ from Newton. They don't actually tell you very many things that differ from Newton. In fact, most of what Einstein was doing was tweaking and shoring up classical mechanics to be able to explain for the empirical phenomena that just were not being accounted for in the Newtonian and Galilean framework. And so it's almost like he's the end of uh, classical physics. And similar for Nietzsche, to me, whenever I look at what Nietzsche does, he seems to me like the end of classical philosophy, meaning he's culminating, he's finishing it up, just doing away with it. Wittgenstein is similar to me, though I don't think Wittgenstein actually. So, Wittgenstein, Nietzsche, they're just two philosophers that they are. Mm, well, so this isn't supposed to be a talk about philosophy, but I'm just explaining it like this to communicate that for me, nothing is just the tried, true, traditional view, vantage point of anything. Everything has some merit, as far as I can tell, to some degree. So it depends. When I say everything, I shouldn't say it's most things have some merit, and it depends on it depends on what you're doing with relation to what, why you care, and what your concerns are, and what conclusions you're trying to derive from some methodology or a school of analysis or thought per se. Because um yeah, so I'd put it like that. As it pertains to mathematics, yay Pythagoras. As it pertains to philosophy, no Pythagoras. Um, and so yeah, I mean I guess that's how I think about it. I don't and so when it comes to American politics, I don't um I don't look at it very differently. Uh, so when I hear the reasons for why people think and believe what they believe, or at least the ones that people express or give, I think they're very poor. And I also think that from what I can observe from my personal experience, that social political matters are far more empirical than anything else, because whenever you're looking at a state of affairs within any sort of social context, the actual factors that seem to influence things in terms of who people are, what's going on with them, seem to be mostly material, though people ascribe certain psychological whatever to things, and people think that the people give very much so greater credence to ideological aspects and factors of belief, which definitely do influence things. But in terms of whenever you're looking at the so I tend to think of it like this. I suppose you can say that this is a pragmatist or a constructivistic standpoint. I don't think Maslow was too off from his hierarchy of needs, in terms of at the bottom of the hierarchy, you do have physical and material needs. I think whenever you're looking at human beings, I think Maslow's hierarchy was a bit crude from the standpoint of what are the fundamental base needs of a human being. It's not just shelter and so on and so forth. I think you have to put even affection and certain social relations at the bottom of the base of needs, because human beings are developmental creatures. I don't think you can stratify it as cleanly as he did and separate food and shelter and those things from social factors. I don't think that. It's definitely the case that if you have a lot of affection and care and social appreciation, that it doesn't feel good to starve. But it's not the case that, yeah, all of those, to me, I think of it more from an equilibrated standpoint, that you would like all of those engines to be humming and balanced with one another, such that you have a functioning individual. An individual who can, a social functioning individual. That's the way that I'd put it. I don't necessarily mean agreeable, because I'm not an agreeable person, but I get along with people when it makes sense. I dissent and argue and have been and do get in conflicts with individuals when it makes sense. when something makes sense is something I evaluate and judge based off of reasoning and what I've read and prior experiences and things like that. If a salesperson comes to my door trying to sell me, this has happened to me a few times, I guess, because I live in Southern California, but vegan products, I tell them to go somewhere because I think that it's great that they have their own independent venture and that they believe in something. But I do not think, for example, the things that people do believe are as empirically founded as they do. And that's not to make a slight against veganism. It's more the certain aspects of veganism. So again, like when you're talking about veganism, I think from the ecological standpoint, yeah, vegans are right. We've done too much to the environment. I've actually studied ecology, and I've actually looked at the data in terms of what's going on with our oceans and deforestation rates and extinction rates, and they're pretty bad. There's actually more forests on the planet now than at any point in time in the Earth's history. But the issue is that ecosystems are changing too drastically. They're changing too drastically and too rapidly, and that's all due to human activity. And that's the problem because ecosystems are self-organizing systems, so they're very sensitive and slow to change. They can change rapidly and violently, but trying to reverse the changes are just, you don't have the same sort of organizational schema that you had before once you insert the change. And so that's a problem because you animals and ecosystems are in a certain synergistic symbiotic relationship. You can't have the ecosystems. So a lot of times when people are talking about planting trees, I mean, I'm not all about planting trees and everything like that. I'm more about keeping the animal, bacteria, insect, bird biosphere in a certain regulatory makeup. All of it evolved together. And I think what people want to save animals because they find them cute, but I think that that's the wrong kind of deal. You have to understand that animals. When I say animals, I know the insects. So I mean the whole animal kingdom. The whole animal kingdom is as instrumental to the way the world looks and our being able to be on this planet and to receive the benefits that ecosystems provide us. It's a very sensitive thing, and so from that standpoint, uh, I agree with vegans, but I'm gonna have to leave pretty soon because I have to go meet somebody. But from that standpoint, I agree with vegans, and but the rest of their things, I mean, I'm just like, look, man, that's so off base. Like, it doesn't seem empirically or rational. It doesn't seem to make sense. So, I'd say that, and I feel like that whenever I listen to things that are said by Democrats, whenever I listen to things that are said by conservatives. It's really libertarians are the closest to something that's sound enough for me to say, I can see it, but at the same time, just because they tend to be more interested in the science of economics. So whenever it comes to economic matters, I tend to trust libertarians more than I trust any other group because there doesn't seem to be, there's problems with the science of economics. I'm not saying that there isn't or anything like that. It's just there's problems with everything. So I'm also not a person who believes in utopias or perfection necessarily. I only think you can have perfection in a very limited set of cases. And so I would say that because things are not perfect, just because things aren't perfect, they don't bother me. It's just how much problematic, what kind of problematic aspects arise from these things, and how much of it can you tolerate within certain systems before you have a critical mass of some variety that's undesirable. And so that's how I think of all issues. And so I tend to say that I'm a political empiricist. I don't really know if that's a real thing, but I take things case by case, call it the way I see it. And so I call it the way that I see it at that time. And my ideas are going to change across time when it comes to political matters and even within weeks, days, and months of their initial conception, because you get new information all the time, and so I have to fit it all together and make sense of it. It's not just a general clean swath of things. To put it more succinctly, I have no fidelity to ideas. Even though I debate and I argue with people about things, I really do not have fidelity when it comes to ideas. There are ideas I'll maintain and keep. I juggle a lot of ideas simultaneously, not knowing which one is really valid necessarily in that moment. I am eliminating these ideas and things like that over time. Certain ideas tend to stand and stay around consistently longer than other ones, but I'm not under the presumption that that means that they're necessarily right. That just means that that's what I can reason out at that current stage in time, given what I know and my experiences in the world. But that's going to change. I mean, everything's going to change. I look for principles, but the principles I find usually have to deal with things about reasoning and thinking about things. I do not find general principles that stay consistent about the nature of reality. Principles that I find usually have something to do with what's appropriate in thinking and how can you reason about certain objects, and differentiating objects and things like that to reason about, but it all centers around reason. It does not, and reason is not the world. So that's how I put it. Whenever I think about what the world is, I think your guess is as good as mine. There are certain ways. There's certain things we can arrive at, certain things we can know, certain things that we may not be able to know, but nothing seems to me to just be one-to-one, clear-cut, and obvious as people try to make it. And so since I have to go and meet this person and they're texting me, asking me where I am, I'm going to leave this video here. So this is probably going to wind up being another series along with all the many other unfinished series that I have. But I really want to finish this series, so it'll probably be 4 parts, just so I can be thorough in my presentation, because I mean, the world right now is very politically interested, and I don't think people hear opinions on political matters from somebody who's not politically interested. I'm not really politically interested. I'm not even somebody who says I'm not politically interested while secretly being politically interested, like Jordan B. Peterson. So I'd put it like that. So that's my video, and thank you for watching.